My name is Rachel Bennett. I'm 33 years old, and at my brother's welcome home dinner, my father stood in our dining room with 30 people watching and said, "Rachel's old room is going to Jason and Melissa. She doesn't live here anymore." My brother nodded, like the room had always been his to inherit. His wife smiled and said they had already picked a paint color. My younger sister Chloe stared at her plate. I looked down the hall at the bedroom door my mother had painted blue when I was 12, the same door she once touched with 2 fingers and said, "Keep one room where you are still allowed to come home." Then my father looked at me and added, "Don't make this emotional. You left this family years ago." I smiled. I nodded. Then the doorbell rang. The landlord was standing on the porch with the annual renewal packet in his hand, and he said, "I'm here for Rachel Bennett. She's the leaseholder." Nobody moved. My brother blinked like he had misheard. My father's face went flat. Melissa's smile disappeared. I reached into my tote bag, took out the blue lease folder I had carried for 5 years, and placed it on the dining table between the salad bowl and the cake nobody had cut yet. Inside were the lease agreements, rent receipts, eviction notices, repair invoices, bank transfers, and every text my father had sent asking me not to tell Jason who was keeping the house standing. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I put one hand on the folder and said, "Before anyone gives away my room, maybe we should talk about who kept this house." The house on Briar Lane was never ours in the legal sense, but it was ours in every other way that mattered to a child. White siding, narrow porch, 2 maple trees out front, a kitchen window that stuck in July, and a hallway that always smelled like lemon cleaner, because my mother believed a clean floor could make a hard life look more manageable. My parents rented it when I was 6. Jason was 4, and Chloe was not born yet. My father promised we would buy a house one day. My mother never corrected him in front of us. She just paid rent on the 3rd of every month, wrote the receipt number on a calendar, and kept the carbon copies in a shoebox under her bed. I learned later that she did not trust promises unless they came with paper. My mother's name was Evelyn Bennett. She worked front desk at a dental office, wore soft cardigans in every shade of blue, and believed children needed 2 things: food that did not run out and a door that opened when they came back. "A home is not a prize for the child who stays closest," she told me once while folding towels. "It is a place that remembers you, even when you are gone." I was 14. I did not understand why she sounded sad. I thought homes remembered everyone automatically. I had not yet learned that families can rewrite a place while you are standing in it. In our house, the old rule was never framed as a rule. It arrived disguised as common sense. Sons build the family. Daughters help until they are needed somewhere else. Jason was never asked to notice it. He lived inside it like weather. When he forgot to take out trash, Dad said he had a lot on his mind. When I forgot once, Dad said girls needed to learn responsibility early. When Jason broke the garage window with a baseball, Dad called it boy energy. When I cried because he used my school art project as a coaster, Dad said I was too sensitive. Mom saw it. She did not always stop it, and that is a truth I had to make peace with later, but she saw it. Sometimes after dinner, when Dad praised Jason for helping with something I had already done, Mom would catch my eye across the kitchen and tap 2 fingers on the table. It meant, "I know." It meant, "I see you." It was not enough, but at 12 years old, it kept me from feeling invisible. The room at the end of the hallway became the one place where I could prove to myself I existed. It had a brass hook on the back of the door, a narrow bookshelf, and a desk my mother bought from a teacher who was moving to Florida. She sanded the top herself and let me choose a blue paint that looked almost silver in afternoon light. On the day she finished it, she stood in the doorway with a rag in her hand and said, "Everyone deserves one door that opens to their own name." I thought she was talking about paint. She was talking about survival. If you have ever had a room, a drawer, a shelf, or even one small corner that told you you still belong somewhere, tell me in the comments. And if you are new here, subscribe to Quiet Truth Stories. This is a story about a room, a lease, and the difference between leaving a family and being quietly written out of it. My room was at the end of the hallway, the smallest bedroom, but it had the best afternoon light. Mom painted the walls pale blue the summer before 7th grade because I had saved magazine photos of bedrooms with blue walls and white curtains. She found a quilt at a church rummage sale, repaired the torn corner by hand, and laid it across my bed like it was expensive. On the back of my door, she put a brass hook for my backpack. "This is your place," she said. "Not because nobody else can enter, but because everyone should knock." Jason did not knock. Dad did not think boys had to. Mom did. That was our quiet war. She would call from the kitchen, "Jason, knock." He would groan and say I was dramatic. Mom would say, "A door is a boundary with hinges." I loved that sentence before I knew what boundaries were. Years later, when she was sick, that sentence would come back to me every time my father opened a door he had not earned. Mom got breast cancer when I was 22. By then, I was living 40 minutes away in Columbus, working customer support for an insurance company, and taking night classes in accounting because numbers made more sense to me than people did. Jason was 20. He had dropped out of community college twice and was figuring things out, which meant he had a truck Dad helped him buy, and opinions about everybody else's choices. Chloe was 12, still small enough to sit sideways in Mom's lap, even after the chemo made Mom's arms thin. During treatment, I came home every weekend. I cleaned, I cooked, I took Chloe to school events. I sat with Mom during infusions when Dad said hospitals made him feel useless. Jason came sometimes with coffee and left before parking expired. Dad called him thoughtful. I brought insurance forms, prescription lists, and grocery bags. Dad called me dependable. There are compliments that feel like cages if you hear them long enough. Mom died on a rainy Tuesday in October. The house changed shape immediately. Not physically. The kitchen still had the same yellow curtains. The hallway still creaked near the bathroom. My blue bedroom still caught afternoon light. But without Mom, the house lost the person who remembered what belonged to whom. At the funeral lunch, relatives filled every room. Someone set a casserole on my desk and left a grease ring on my college notebook. Jason's friends sat on my bed in shoes. Dad did not notice. Chloe stood in the doorway, holding Mom's blue cardigan, and looked at me like she was waiting for instructions. I took the cardigan, folded it, and placed it on my pillow. Then I closed the bedroom door. Jason opened it 10 minutes later to get extra chairs. I said, "Knock." He rolled his eyes. Dad heard me from the hallway and said, "Not today, Rachel." Not today became not this week. Then, not this month. Then, not ever, unless I made it matter. After Mom died, Dad's finances got worse quickly. He had always acted like the head of the house, but Mom had been the spine. She paid bills, renewed forms, called the landlord, tracked rent, remembered due dates, and made Dad feel like he was in charge by never saying out loud how much she managed. Without her, late notices arrived. Utilities came close to shut off. Rent slipped from the 3rd to the 10th to the 22nd. I found the first eviction notice tucked behind the toaster when Chloe called me crying because a yellow paper had been taped to the front door. Dad said it was a misunderstanding. Jason said, "Landlords always bluff." Chloe asked if she had to change schools. I drove home that night with my laptop, a folder, and the kind of fear that makes you calm. The landlord was a man named Howard Ellis. He had owned the house for 20 years and had liked my mother because she paid on time and never pretended a repair was optional. He met me the next morning at a coffee shop near the courthouse. He brought a ledger. I brought bank statements. Dad was 4 months behind. Late fees had stacked. The total was $8,740. Mr. Ellis said, not unkindly, "I can't renew with your father. His credit is shot, and he won't answer calls." I asked what it would take to keep Chloe in the house until graduation. He looked at me for a long time. A responsible leaseholder. That was how the blue lease folder began. I signed my name on the lease 3 weeks after Mom's funeral. Rachel Ann Bennett, primary leaseholder. My father listed as approved occupant. Chloe listed as minor resident. Jason not listed, because at the time he was living with a friend and telling everyone he might move to Nashville, though he had no plan, no job offer, and no reason except that Nashville sounded like something a man with options would say. I paid the arrears from my savings and a credit card I spent 2 years paying down. Mr. Ellis gave me a receipt, a new lease packet, and a warning. Do not put your name on paper for people who will treat your signature like air, he said. I should have listened harder. That night, I sat at the dining table and explained the arrangement to Dad. Chloe was in her room. Jason was not there. Dad kept rubbing his forehead. "So the lease is in your name?" "Yes." "But I'll pay you back. You'll pay rent to me by the 1st. I'll pay Ellis." He nodded too quickly. "Of course." Then he looked toward the hallway and lowered his voice. "Don't tell Jason the details." I stared at him. Why? He doesn't need to feel like the house is being handled by his sister. I remember the sound the refrigerator made in that pause. A low rattle, then a click. The house is being handled by his sister. Dad looked wounded. "You know what I mean." I did. That was the problem. He meant Jason's pride was still a family expense, and I was expected to pay it quietly. I should have said no. Instead, I thought of Chloe sleeping down the hall. Mom's quilt folded in my old room, the maple trees outside, the door that had opened for me after every hard day of high school. I said, "Fine, but I'm keeping records." Dad waved his hand like records were a personality flaw. "Keep whatever you want." So I did. I bought a blue accordion folder from an office supply store in Columbus. Inside went the lease, rent receipts, copies of bank transfers, the eviction notice, repair invoices, emails from Mr. Ellis, and screenshots of every text Dad sent about money. The folder grew slowly. $300 from Dad, $900 from me. Dad short again, me covering the difference. Plumbing repair, paid by me because Dad said his hours had been cut. Roof patch, paid by me after Jason said he knew a guy and the guy made it worse. Electric bill, paid by me when Chloe called because the house was dark except for the stove clock. For 5 years, the story outside the folder was simple. Rachel left. Rachel had an apartment. Rachel was doing fine. Dad and Chloe were managing. Jason was trying. Inside the folder, the story had numbers. Numbers are not emotional, which is why people who rewrite the truth hate them. They do not care who feels embarrassed. They only show what happened. I still came home twice a month. My old bedroom stayed mostly untouched because I insisted on it. Not because I slept there often, though sometimes I did, after late drives or family emergencies. I kept it because Mom had told me to keep one room where I was still allowed to come home. The room held my old desk, a shelf of paperbacks, the blue quilt, 2 boxes of Mom's things, and a locked drawer with her last birthday card to me. Dad complained sometimes. "It's wasted space." I said, "So is the dining room when nobody eats there." He stopped bringing it up for a while. Chloe used my room when she needed quiet. She would sit at my desk and do homework, while Dad watched television too loud in the living room. At 16, she got into a dual enrollment program with a community college. At 17, she started talking about leaving for university in Cincinnati. Dad said she should stay local for 2 years. "Save money," he said. "Help around here." Jason said, "College is college. Why go 3 hours away?" I heard the old rule clearing its throat. Sons build the family. Daughters help until needed elsewhere. Chloe called me after that dinner and said, "Did Mom ever want to leave?" I looked at the blue folder on my desk. "I think she wanted you to have the option." Chloe was quiet. "Do I?" I said, "Yes." I had already started a savings account for her application fees, housing deposit, and emergency money. I did not tell Dad. I had learned that some doors only stay open if you do not announce them before the person is ready to walk through. Jason came back into the house in a serious way after he got engaged to Melissa. She was organized, pretty, and very good at speaking as if things had already been agreed to. I did not dislike her at first. She worked at a dental supply company, had a sharp bob haircut, and sent thank you texts with complete punctuation. She had been told a version of our family in which Jason was the loyal son who had stayed close, and I was the older sister who had gone off to make her own life. That version made Jason look patient, and me look optional. I wondered how much of it she believed because she wanted to, and how much because nobody had shown her paper. Their engagement happened fast. By March, they were planning a small courthouse wedding. By April, Dad called to say Jason and Melissa were thinking about staying at the house for a few months while they saved for a place. I asked, "Which room?" Dad said, "We'll figure it out." I said, "Not mine." He sighed the way he did when I made facts inconvenient. "Rachel, you barely use it. It is still my room. You have an apartment. And this lease has my name." He went quiet. Then he said, "Don't start that again." That again meant the truth. For 2 weeks I heard nothing. Then Chloe sent a photo. My bedroom door was open. Paint swatches were taped to the wall. Beige, sage, warm white. On my bed sat a pile of Melissa's bridal magazines and a box labeled Master Bedroom Ideas. My hands went cold. I called Dad. He did not answer. I called Jason. He answered on speaker. I could hear hardware store noise behind him. "Why are there paint swatches in my room?" He laughed. "You mean the museum? My room. Rach, come on. Melissa and I need space. You live in Columbus. Dad said it was fine. Dad does not get to give away a room in a house I lease." The speaker went muffled. Then Jason came back, voice lower. "Do you hear yourself? You sound insane. It's a room. Then use another one. Chloe needs hers. Dad needs his. The den is tiny. The den is available. Melissa and I are married adults. Then pay married adult rent somewhere else. He hung up. 10 minutes later, Dad texted, "You embarrassed your brother at Lowe's." I screenshotted it and put it in the blue folder. Then I called Mr. Ellis. He answered on the third ring. "Rachel, everything okay? I need to know when renewal is due. End of the month. I was going to email. Can you bring the paperwork in person next Saturday at 6:30? He paused. "Is there a reason?" I looked at Chloe's photo of paint samples on my wall. "Yes. My family is confused about who can make housing decisions." Mr. Ellis sighed. "I wondered when that would happen." That sentence told me Dad had tried something already. "Howard," another pause. "Your father called last week asking if he could remove you from the lease and put Jason on." I sat down slowly. "What did you say?" "No, Jason is not financially qualified, and your father is not either without you. I told him you would need to request any change yourself." I closed my eyes. Dad had not just tried to give away my room. He had tried to erase the signature keeping the roof over Chloe's head. "Please come Saturday," I said. "Bring everything." Saturday was Jason and Melissa's welcome home dinner. Dad called it that, even though they were moving into a house they did not rent, into a room they had not asked me for, under a lease they did not understand. There would be relatives, Melissa's parents, 2 cousins, Aunt Diane, and a sheet cake from the grocery store that said, "Welcome home, Jason and Melissa," in blue icing. I drove from Columbus with the blue lease folder on the passenger seat and Mom's last birthday card tucked inside the front pocket. I arrived at 5:48. The porch light was on, though it was still bright. Through the front window, I saw people moving around the dining room, passing plates, laughing. For a moment, I sat in the car and looked at the upstairs window of my room. The curtains had been taken down. My curtains. White cotton. Mom had hemmed them by hand because the store length was wrong. That was when I stopped feeling sad and became very calm. Inside, the house smelled like lasagna, garlic bread, and fresh paint. Not memory, not lemon cleaner, fresh paint. I set my tote bag on the entry bench and walked down the hall. My bedroom door was open. The walls had been primed in uneven white patches. My books were stacked in cardboard boxes. The blue quilt was folded badly on top of a laundry basket. My desk drawers had been pulled open. The locked drawer was still locked, but someone had tried the handle hard enough to scratch the wood. Melissa appeared behind me holding a roll of painter's tape. "Oh," she said, "you're early. This is my room." Her face shifted into practiced patience. "I know this is sentimental for you." "No, it is contractual." She blinked. "Jason said you were dramatic about it." I looked at the wall where Mom's curtains had been. "Where are the curtains?" Melissa glanced back toward the dining room. "I think Frank put them in the basement. We needed to see the light." We needed light. I walked to the laundry basket, lifted the quilt, and folded it properly. My hands knew the corners without looking. Melissa watched like folding a quilt could be aggressive if done quietly enough. "Rachel, I'm not trying to take anything from you." "Then why are my things in boxes?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Because the honest answer would have been, because taking is easier when you call it moving forward. Chloe appeared in the hallway then, eyes red. "I told them not to touch your desk." I touched her shoulder. "I know." Her whisper was almost nothing. "Dad said you'd get over it." I looked at the scratched drawer. He has always confused my silence with recovery. Dinner began at 6:15. The dining table had been extended with a card table at the end, covered by a plastic cloth patterned with gold confetti. I sat beside Chloe. Jason sat at the head of the table as if gravity had placed him there. Melissa sat beside him. Dad moved around, filling glasses and performing good humor for Melissa's parents, who seemed kind and completely unaware they were sitting inside a lie. Aunt Diane asked about my job. Before I could answer, Dad said, "Rachel does accounting stuff in Columbus." Accounting stuff. I handled compliance reporting for a regional insurance firm, but accounting stuff was easier to fit in his mouth. Jason talked about starting his own contracting business, though he had not passed the licensing exam yet. Melissa's father asked where the business would be registered. Jason said, "Here, probably. Family home base." I felt Chloe stiffen. I looked at Dad. He looked at his plate. Another page for the folder. At 6:28, Dad stood with a glass of iced tea and smiled at the room. "I just want to say how happy I am to have Jason and Melissa starting their life here with us. This house has always been about family. Evelyn would have loved seeing it full." My mother's name in his mouth while my curtains sat in the basement made something in me sharpen. Dad continued, "We've had to make some adjustments, of course." Rachel's old room is going to Jason and Melissa. She doesn't live here anymore. Every head turned toward me, not sharply, softly, with the curious discomfort people bring to family tension they do not intend to help fix. Jason gave me a look that said, "Don't ruin this." Melissa smiled too brightly. Dad added, "Don't make this emotional. You left this family years ago." The doorbell rang before I could answer. The timing was not dramatic by accident. Mr. Ellis was punctual. Dad frowned. "Who is that?" I stood. "The landlord." The room shifted. Jason laughed once. "Why is Howard here?" I walked to the door and opened it. Mr. Ellis stood on the porch in a gray jacket, holding a manila envelope and his reading glasses. He looked past me into the dining room, took in the faces, the cake, the boxes in the hallway, and the open bedroom door. "Evening," he said. "I'm here for Rachel Bennett. She's the leaseholder." If silence had weight, the dining table would have cracked. Mr. Ellis stepped inside. Dad's mouth opened and closed. Jason said, "Wait. What?" Melissa's mother looked at Melissa. Chloe put one hand over her mouth. I returned to the dining room, took the blue lease folder from my tote, and laid it on the table where everyone could see it. "Before anyone gives away my room," I said, "maybe we should talk about who kept this house." Dad said my name under his breath, the way parents do when they are not asking you to stop because you are wrong, but because you are about to become inconvenient. "Rachel." I opened the folder. No, one word. Calm. Small enough not to sound theatrical, clear enough that the room understood I was not asking permission. The first page was the eviction notice from 5 years earlier, yellowed slightly at the edges. I placed it on the plastic tablecloth beside the lasagna. 3 weeks after Mom died, this house was 4 months behind on rent. The total due was $8,740. Aunt Diane whispered, "Frank?" Dad stared at the notice like it had crawled out of a grave. I placed the receipt beside it. "I paid it." Jason leaned forward. "You never said that." I looked at him. "Dad asked me not to. He said you would feel embarrassed." Jason turned to Dad. "What does that mean?" Dad rubbed his forehead. The same motion from 5 years ago. "It was a hard time." Mr. Ellis remained near the doorway, quiet, professional, unwilling to perform the family's work for us, but present enough that nobody could pretend this was only emotion. I removed the lease agreement. Howard would not renew with Dad because the payment history and credit were too damaged. I signed as primary leaseholder so Chloe could stay in school, and so Dad would not have to move 3 weeks after burying Mom. Melissa's father set down his fork. "Primary leaseholder?" Mr. Ellis nodded. "Correct." Jason's face reddened. "But Dad lives here." "As an approved occupant," I said. "Chloe, too. You are not on the lease." Melissa looked at Jason. "You said your family had the house." Jason snapped. "We do." Mr. Ellis said, not unkindly, "You occupy a rental property under Rachel Bennett's lease." That was the cleanest sentence in the room. It did what clean sentences do. It removed fog. I turned the next section of the folder toward the table. 5 years of rent receipts, clipped by year. Dad paid what he could. Sometimes a few hundred, sometimes nothing. I covered the rest. I paid repairs when necessary. I paid the electrician when the house almost lost power. I paid the roof patch after Jason's guy made it worse. I paid the plumbing invoice when the upstairs bathroom leaked through the kitchen ceiling, and Dad told Chloe to put a bucket under it. Chloe's face was wet now. I hated that. I hated that truth had to pass through her before it reached the people who made it necessary. Dad said, "I always meant to pay you back. You also tried to remove me from the lease last week." Jason looked up sharply. "What?" I glanced at Mr. Ellis. He stepped forward and opened his envelope. "Frank Bennett contacted me requesting that Rachel be removed and Jason Bennett be added." I declined. Any change requires Rachel's authorization, and Jason did not meet the lease requirements based on the information available. Melissa pulled her hand away from Jason's on the table. It was small, but everyone saw it. Jason said, "Dad, you told me it was handled." Dad looked at me instead of him. This is why I didn't want everything turned into paperwork. Families should not have to live like a court case. I looked down at the blue folder. Families should not make paperwork the only place truth survives. That sentence came from somewhere deeper than anger. Maybe from Mom's shoebox of receipts. Maybe from every time she tapped 2 fingers on the table because she saw what nobody else wanted named. I removed the screenshots next. Dad's texts printed in chronological order. "Don't tell Jason. He'll feel embarrassed. Can you cover rent and I'll get you next month? Please don't mention the lease around Melissa. Jason needs to feel like he can provide. Rachel, let him have this. It's just a room. The last one had come that morning. Don't make your brother small in front of his wife. I placed that page in the center. You asked me to make myself small for 5 years, so Jason would not have to feel small for 5 minutes. Nobody spoke. Jason looked at the texts, then at Dad, then at me. For the first time that night, he looked less angry than unsure. Melissa's mother quietly passed Chloe a napkin. The argument did not explode. It cracked in several places at once. Jason stood, sat back down, then stood again. I didn't know, he said. He said it to Melissa first, then to the room, then maybe to himself. I didn't know she was paying for everything. I believed him partly, not completely. There are things a person does not know because nobody tells him, and things he does not know because knowing would require changing. Jason had spent years accepting comfort without asking what it cost. Still, not knowing mattered. It did not erase harm, it located it. Melissa looked at me with a face I had not seen from her before. Embarrassment, yes, but also something like fear. I'm sorry about the room, she said. Jason turned toward her. Mel. She did not look at him. No, your sister's things were in there. I nodded once. Thank you. Dad pulled out a chair and sat heavily. I was trying to keep the family together. That old phrase. The one people use when they mean they were trying to keep the most fragile ego intact. I took Mom's birthday card from the front pocket of the folder. The envelope was soft from years of being opened. I did not read the whole card. That was mine. But I unfolded the small note she had tucked inside before her last birthday. A home is not home if only sons are welcome, Evelyn. My hands trembled then. Finally. Not much. Enough that Chloe reached under the table and touched my wrist. I placed the note beside the lease. Mom wrote that to me 6 months before she died. Dad covered his face with one hand. Aunt Diane started crying quietly. Jason stared at the note like it had accused him personally. It had not. That was the harder part. Mom had not hated Jason. She had feared what the family would become around him. Here is what happens now, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I am not ending the lease tonight. Chloe lives here. Dad lives here. I am not making anyone homeless to prove a point. Dad looked up quickly, relief moving across his face too soon. But, I said, and he stopped. My room is not available. My belongings go back exactly where they were. The curtains come out of the basement. The desk drawer is repaired or replaced by whoever scratched it. Jason and Melissa may use the den for 3 months if Howard approves them as temporary occupants and if they pay a written rent contribution. Jason opened his mouth. Melissa spoke before him. That's fair. He looked at her. She looked back. Something passed between them that was going to become a private argument later. I did not envy them. I continued. Jason will not register a business at this address unless I approve it in writing and Howard approves it under the lease. Mr. Ellis nodded. That would be required. Jason muttered. Fine. I looked at Dad. And nobody tells Chloe she has to stay local to help with a house I have been carrying in secret. Chloe's grip tightened around my wrist. Dad's face changed. This has nothing to do with Chloe. It has everything to do with Chloe. I opened the last section of the folder. Not lease documents, a savings statement, campus housing deposit receipt, and scholarship acceptance from the University of Cincinnati. Chloe made a small sound. She had seen the scholarship email. She had not seen the housing deposit. You paid it? She whispered. The deposit, application fees, and first emergency fund transfer, I said. The rest is your scholarship, your loans if you choose them, and your work. But you are not staying because they made staying sound like love. Dad said, Rachel, she's 17. She will be 18 in August. She's too young to be 3 hours away. Chloe wiped her face. I'm not too young to cook dinner, schedule your medicine, answer landlord calls when you don't pick up, and calm you down when bills come. I'm only too young when I want to leave. The room went still again, not because of paper this time, because Chloe had found her voice, and it did not sound like asking. Dad looked at her as if she had grown up behind his back. Maybe she had. Maybe all daughters do when families confuse obedience with childhood. Mr. Ellis cleared his throat gently. I can leave the renewal packet with Rachel. There is time to adjust occupant terms. He looked at me. Take a few days. I thanked him. He left quietly, closing the door with more respect than half the people who had lived inside it. After Mr. Ellis left, the dinner could not become dinner again. The lasagna cooled, the garlic bread hardened, the welcome home cake sat untouched, blue icing beginning to bleed at the edges. People left in careful waves. Melissa's parents first, polite and stiff. Aunt Diane hugged Chloe too long, then hugged me and whispered, "Your mother would be proud." I did not know whether that helped. Jason went outside with Melissa and argued in low voices by his truck. Dad stayed at the dining table, staring at the blue folder. Chloe and I went to my room. She helped me carry the boxes back from the hallway. We rehung Mom's curtains. One hook was bent. Chloe found the quilt in the laundry basket and laid it across the bed properly, smoothing the corners the way Mom taught us. For a while, neither of us spoke. The room smelled like primer and cardboard, but with the curtains back up, I could almost recognize it. Chloe sat on the edge of the bed. I thought maybe I was selfish for wanting to leave. I sat beside her. Wanting a future is not selfish. Dad makes it sound like leaving means I don't love him. Dad has learned to call need love when it keeps daughters close. Chloe looked at the blue door. Did you feel guilty? Yes. Does it stop? I thought about that. Outside, Jason's truck started, then stopped. Melissa's voice rose, then lowered. Dad's chair scraped in the dining room. It changes, I said. At first, guilt feels like a siren. Then it becomes background noise. Then one day you realize it was never your emergency. Chloe leaned her head on my shoulder, the way she had when she was little and Mom was in treatment. She smelled like vanilla shampoo and stress. Can I still come back? She asked. That question nearly broke me, not because it was childish, because it was the whole wound. What is the cost of leaving? Do I lose the door? Do I lose the room? Do I become a visitor in the place that raised me? I put my arm around her. Yes, that's the point. You get to leave without losing your place to come back. Later that night, Jason knocked on the open bedroom door. For the first time in my memory, he knocked. I looked at Chloe. She raised her eyebrows. Jason stood in the hall with both hands in his pockets. Can I talk to you? I said, here. He glanced at Chloe. Private? Chloe stood. I'm going to check the cake nobody ate. After she left, Jason walked in and stopped near the desk, careful not to touch anything. I really didn't know about the lease, he said. I believed that more now than I had at dinner. Okay. I knew you helped. I didn't know it was like that. Did you ever ask? He looked down. No. That was the first honest thing he gave me. I let it sit. He swallowed. Melissa is furious. At you? At everyone. Mostly me. Good. He almost smiled, then didn't. I'm sorry about the room. I thought Dad had talked to you. You thought Dad had permission because permission would have complicated what you wanted. He flinched. That's fair. I expected defensiveness. He gave me tiredness instead. I don't know how to be the person everyone thinks I am, he said. That sentence was so unexpectedly small that I had to look away for a second. Jason had benefited from the rule. He had also been trapped inside the performance of it. That did not make us equal victims. It did make the room more complicated. Start by paying rent, I said. He laughed once, a real laugh, surprised out of him. Then he nodded. Yeah, I can do that. And apologize to Chloe. I will. And do not use this address for your business. I won't. He looked at Mom's curtains. She really wrote that note? I nodded. A home is not home if only sons are welcome. Jason rubbed his eyes. She knew us. She knew the house. He left the room without touching the door frame. Small mercies. Specific progress. The next morning, Dad made coffee before I woke up. I found him at the kitchen table with the blue folder closed in front of him. He looked older in daylight. Not softer exactly, more visible. I owe you money, he said. I poured coffee. Yes? I can't pay it. I know. He looked ashamed, but shame is not repayment. I should have told Jason. Yes. I should not have tried to take you off the lease. No. You should not have. He stared at his mug. I didn't want him to know I failed. I sat across from him. So you made me disappear instead. His mouth tightened. I didn't think of it like that. That was the luxury. Dad cried then, quietly. I had seen him angry, tired, sentimental, proud, defensive, but I had rarely seen him cry without trying to turn the room toward comforting him. This time, he did not ask me to make it better. He wiped his face with a napkin and said, "Your mother handled things I didn't even know needed handling." I said, "I know. You do too. I know that too." He looked toward the hallway. I hear her in this house sometimes. I did not answer. I did too, but not always in the way he meant. I heard her in the receipts, in the curtains, in Chloe's question, in the note that told me she had seen the future clearly enough to warn me. Dad said, "I don't want Chloe to leave angry. Then help her leave prepared." He nodded slowly like the sentence cost him something. "I can try." "Try on paper," I said. He almost smiled. "You and your paper." Paper kept the house. He did not argue. That afternoon, we made a new list. Occupant application for Jason and Melissa if they still wanted the den. Written rent contribution. Repair cost for my desk. Dad's monthly payment schedule, even if small. Chloe's move-out timeline. Lease renewal with me remaining primary until Chloe left for school, then a 6-month review. I wrote everything down. Dad watched. "You don't trust me," he said. "I trust records." That was as gentle as I could make it. Jason and Melissa ended up staying for 2 months, not 3. The den was small, and reality is an excellent decorator. Melissa refused to unpack fully until Jason showed her his actual bank statements. That created several conversations they should have had before marriage. I stayed out of them. Jason paid rent both months, late by 2 days the second time, but paid. He also repaired the desk drawer himself. Not perfectly. The stain did not match, but the lock worked again, and he left a note inside the drawer that said, "I'm sorry I tried to live in a version of this house that was easier for me." I kept the note, not because it fixed everything, because it was paper. In August, Chloe moved into her dorm in Cincinnati. Dad came. Jason and Melissa came too. We carried boxes up 3 flights because the elevator line was too long. Chloe's roommate had pink bedding, 3 lamps, and a mother who cried into a tissue while pretending not to. Dad stood in the doorway holding Chloe's winter coat, completely useless in August because he needed something to hold. When it was time to leave, he hugged her too tightly and said, "Call when you get there." Chloe laughed. "I'm already here." He cried in the parking garage, but he did not ask her to come home. That mattered. On the drive back, I stopped by the house on Briar Lane before returning to Columbus. My room was quiet. The blue walls had been repainted properly, not because I wanted to erase the primer, but because Chloe and I decided the old color deserved a fresh version. The white curtains were clean. Mom's quilt lay across the bed. I opened the desk drawer and took out her birthday card. Then I added a new folder to the blue Lease folder. Chloe. Housing receipt, scholarship letters, emergency fund confirmation, a photo of her standing in front of her dorm with one hand shading her eyes from the sun. Under it, I wrote the date. Not because I thought anyone would dispute that she left, because families sometimes forget the cost of making leaving possible. 3 months later, Dad called me on a Sunday evening. I was cooking pasta in my apartment. "Chloe is coming home next weekend," he said. "Laundry?" "Probably." He cleared his throat. I asked before making plans for her room. I smiled at the stove. "Good. I was thinking we could keep your room as yours and turn the den into a guest space. Neutral. It was not poetic, but it was progress." "That sounds reasonable." He paused. "I found your mother's old shoebox. Rent receipts. Years of them. She kept records." She did. Another pause. "I wish I had respected that more." I stirred the pasta. "Me too." "Rachel?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for keeping the house." There it was. 5 years late. Imperfect, not enough, still something. "You're welcome," I said. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and cried for the first time since the dinner. Not the sharp kind, the tired kind. The kind that comes when your body finally believes the emergency has passed, even if the damage remains. I did not cry because Dad thanked me. I cried because I had not realized how long I had been waiting to hear the house named as something I kept, not something I abandoned. By winter, the story had changed in the family, because stories always change after documents enter the room. Aunt Diane told people I had stepped up after Mom died. Jason told Melissa's parents he and I were working through some old family stuff, which was vague but less false than before. Dad stopped saying I left the family. He started saying I worked in Columbus. It sounds like a small difference until you have lived inside the first sentence for years. Chloe came home for Thanksgiving with 2 bags of laundry, a campus sweatshirt, and a new steadiness in her shoulders. She slept in my room the first night because she said it felt peaceful. I slept on the couch and did not mind. In the morning, she found the blue Lease folder on the dining table because I had been updating receipts. She ran her fingers over the tab with her name on it. "Do you ever get tired of keeping proof?" she asked. I looked at the folder, at the careful labels, at the years of paper that had once felt like armor and now felt more like history. "Yes," I said, "but I get more tired of being rewritten." Chloe nodded. "I started keeping a folder at school." "For what?" "Scholarship stuff. work schedules, emails, things people might forget. I should have felt sad. Instead, I felt proud, and then sad, and then proud again. Good, I said, but don't let records become the only place your voice lives. She looked up. Is that what happened to you? For a while. She closed the folder gently. Not anymore. The house on Briar Lane is still a rental. I want to be clear about that because people like stories where a house becomes owned at the end, where the deed changes hands and everyone understands value because money makes it official. This is not that story. I did not inherit the house. I did not buy it out from under my family. I did not become a secret millionaire with a legal trap waiting in the hallway. I signed a lease when nobody else could. I paid rent when nobody wanted to say rent out loud. I kept receipts because my mother taught me that love without records can be buried under someone else's pride. And when my father tried to give away my room, the folder did not give me revenge. It gave me ground. That was enough. The blue room still exists. I do not sleep there often. Sometimes Chloe does. Sometimes it stays empty for months. Jason knocks when he passes it now, even if nobody is inside, which is ridiculous and sweet in a way I'm not ready to tell him. Melissa and I are not close, but she sends me photos when Jason fixes something at their apartment and writes, "He asked before drilling into the wall." Growth, I guess. Dad keeps a copy of Mom's note taped inside the kitchen cabinet where the coffee mugs live. A home is not home if only sons are welcome. He sees it every morning. Maybe that is punishment. Maybe it is prayer. Maybe, in some families, those are closer than we admit. The first spring after Chloe left, she came home with a cardboard model of a dorm room for an architecture class and set it on the dining table where the blue folder had once opened. Dad walked around it like it was fragile. "You made this?" he asked. Chloe said, "Yes." He looked at the tiny paper bed, the tiny desk, the tiny window drawn in pencil. "It has good light," he said. Chloe smiled because she understood what he was trying to say. Not perfectly. Not enough to undo years, but he was learning to praise a daughter's leaving without calling it loss. Jason and Melissa visited that weekend too. They had moved into a small apartment above a hardware store, which Melissa said was noisy but honest. Jason brought a toolbox and fixed the loose hinge on my bedroom door without being asked. When he finished, he knocked on the closed door and waited until I said, "Come in." Then he handed me the old hinge screw like it was evidence. "This thing was stripped," he said. "No wonder it never held right." I looked at the screw in his palm and thought about how many things in that house had been called dramatic when they were actually damaged. "Thanks," I said. He nodded. That was all. Some apologies are spoken once. Others become a series of small repairs. That summer, Mr. Ellis renewed the lease for one more year with my name still on it, but this time Dad signed a separate written payment agreement. Not because I wanted to punish him, because vague promises had almost cost Chloe her home once, and I was done confusing trust with a lack of structure. Dad grumbled for exactly one day. Then he set up automatic transfers and called me the next month to make sure the receipt had come through. I printed it and put it in the folder, not with resentment, but with relief. A record can be a cage if you use it to trap someone. It can also be a bridge if everyone agrees to walk on it. Chloe taped a copy of Mom's note inside her dorm closet. A home is not home if only sons are welcome. Under it, on a yellow sticky note, she wrote, "A future is not a betrayal." She sent me a photo. I saved it in the same digital folder where I kept scans of the lease, the receipts, and her scholarship letter. I know that sounds excessive. Maybe it is, but when you come from a family that can turn 5 years of payments into Rachel left, you learn to save the things that tell the truth while your voice is tired. On the last night of Chloe's winter break, the three of us sat in my blue room, Chloe on the floor, me on the bed, Dad in the desk chair because Jason had repaired it, and Dad wanted to test the hinge as if furniture could certify forgiveness. Chloe was packing textbooks into her backpack. Dad watched her for a long time and then said, "Your mother would have liked seeing you go." Chloe looked up. "You think so?" Dad nodded. "I think she would have cried in the driveway and then bragged about you at the grocery store." Chloe laughed. I did too. It was the first time in years that Mom's absence felt like a place we could sit together instead of a wall between us. Before Chloe went back to school, she left a note in the locked drawer of my desk. I found found it after she was gone. Rachel, you kept the room until I knew leaving was allowed. I'm keeping the notes so I remember coming back is allowed too. Love, Chloe. I folded it once and placed it behind Mom's birthday card. 2 notes in one drawer. 2 women telling me the same thing from different sides of the door. My name is Rachel Bennett. I'm 33 years old. My father gave my room to my brother's wife because he thought daughters could be moved around as long as nobody called it taking. He told everyone I had left, while my name sat on the lease. He protected my brother's pride with my silence and my payments. Then the landlord came to dinner. The blue folder opened, and the house had to tell the truth. I did not keep that house because my family deserved endless rescue. I kept it because Chloe deserved a door that opened both ways, out and back, away and home. I kept it because my mother was right. A home that only welcomes sons is not a home. It is a waiting room for women to disappear. That's my story. 1 blue lease folder, 1 room at the end of the hall, 1 younger sister who learned she could leave without being erased. If this story reminded you of a room you lost, a bill you paid quietly, or a family story that changed once the receipts came out, tell me in the comments. I read them. If you have ever been called selfish for protecting the one place that still remembered you, I want you to know you were not selfish. You were keeping a door from being locked. Like this video if you believe daughters deserve a place to come home to. Share it with someone who has been carrying the paperwork behind a family's pride. And subscribe to Quiet Truth Stories for more emotional family drama stories about hidden truth, quiet strength, and the moment one folder changes the whole room. I'll see you in the next story.